10:40 at night, just found out the horrible news. Didn't even have time to shave. So recently, Sony and Naughty Dog, I guess, announced that they're planning on doing a PlayStation 5 remake of the first Last of Us game. Now, my initial reaction to this was, why? And then I did a little more thinking, and then my second reaction to this was, why? Now, to be fair, Sony was pretty vague with their statement. They just literally said that they're going to be remaking The Last of Us for the PlayStation 5. In today's terms, that can really mean anything. I'm not gonna, say anything definitive, so I'm gonna put it right out there from the very get-go that this video is pure speculation as to what Sony's going to do with The Last of Us remake. Now, to me personally, a little background, I think that The Last of Us as a story has very little to no fat on it, meaning that it's perfection in storytelling in video games. Like, I don't think that the story's perfect or anything. It's obviously pretty generic, but the way that they tell the story and the characters and the motivations and the heart that they managed to put into such a horrifyingly apocalyptic world is fantastic, and it's a great feat of storytelling that they've accomplished with this. This is what kind of elevates Naughty Dog to me in terms of major game AAA studios, is that they take stories that are very simple, like Uncharted, kind of, it's a parody, it's like a homage or an appreciation of Indiana Jones and adventure films from the past, and it elevates it to something that's fun and exciting. Not really worth a replay, like a lot of their games don't have replayability, but that's okay. I mean, not every game needs to be infinitely replayable as long as the experience is great. And that's exactly how I feel about The Last of Us, is that it's a fantastic one-time experience. You get this great story with amazing characters and a narrative that's powerful in a world that's so hopeless. And I feel like they absolutely nailed that. So a remake is a little bit baffling to me. The Last of Us already has an excellent port on the PS4. They could just bring that to the PS5 if they really wanted to. Because in all honesty, the game doesn't really feel that outdated. Like, the shooting mechanics aren't great. They have not aged very well, but the PS4 version kind of patches that up and fixes it a little bit. And that's what I always felt like that was Naughty Dog's biggest weakness. Their shooting mechanics in their games aren't great. Like the Uncharted 2, for example, has this really annoying lock-on mechanic where it's not quite accurate. When you aim from out of cover, you don't aim at anything in particular, so you are left in the open, and you take several shots before you can find your target and kill them. It might seem more realistic, like you're not obviously going to automatically lock onto an opponent, but it's incredibly annoying in video games. The Last of Us was heavily criticized for its gameplay when it first came out. And same thing with The Last of Us 2, that game was criticized. I even criticized it for its lackluster puzzles and other activities to do aside from shooting people. That is something that they could realistically patch up. But again, like, The Last of Us does not need a remake. I mean, from what we're hearing on the inside is that this comes from an executive in Sony who really likes these exclusive blockbuster type games, and they want just more and more and more of them, because as of right now the PS5 doesn't really have any exciting titles aside from like Demon's Souls, and then it came at the cost of other studios' games like Days Gone 2. My guess is because the executives at Sony want this to coincide with the HBO show that's going on, but I really don't know. I really don't see the reason why this needs to be made, but we can kind of speculate as to what it'll be. So what I'm assuming The Last of Us remake will be is a retelling of the same story, maybe. You have the basic fundamentals, the meat and potatoes. You have Joel and Ellie as characters. Ellie is immune to this disease that's spreading around and ravaging and turning everybody into zombies, and they need to get from point A to point B, and they need to get there alive. so that Ellie has a chance to save the world, right? That kind of simple story is really effective when told right, and I feel like The Last of Us absolutely perfected it. As I said earlier, I feel like they couldn't have told that story any better, and now that I'm thinking about it, I don't really think that there's any character or location I felt that needed more explanation without bogging the game down. Like, obviously there's characters that you could expand on more, like Tess, Joel's friend that lives in that garage, Joel's brother. Like, there's definitely more characterization that you can do, especially to provide more context for The Last of Us Part 2. But again, I don't really feel like that's necessary, because the characters, they don't ever overstay their welcome. Like, for example, think of Henry and his brother. It's a small moment that happens in The Last of Us when you're playing it, and just in that tiny moment you get their background, you get like what it takes for them to survive, what they believe in. Henry has a life and death devotion to his brother, and he would do anything for him, even sacrifice Joel and Ellie. He would do literally anything for him, and you can tell that from the moment his character appears, that he just cares about his brother, because that's literally all he has left. And there isn't this whole dialogue dump about their characters. They just share little details about their lives, and that's all you need. When that storyline comes to the horrifically tragic end that it does, it really affects you despite you barely knowing these characters all that much. And that's because the game doesn't feel this need to fill you in on their backstory, or you're only with them for such a short time that the developers and the writers felt the need to characterize them perfectly in just that moment. And it works. It works extremely well in a way that doesn't need to be expanded upon. And if that's the route that they go with, I would feel really sad, because this game is, like I said, this game is perfect with its storytelling, its characters. Everything feels alive. And some characters only in the game for a very brief period of time. Like Tess is remembered as a badass, like, female character, and she's not even in the game for that long. When the game jumps forward 20 years, the relationship that Joel and Tess have is all you need to know about them. Is all you need to know about Tess, that she doesn't take no shit from anybody, and her and Joel have a very long history together. And that's all you need to know. Like, it sets the groundwork perfectly for their characters. And once again, when Tess's story comes to a tragic end, you really feel it despite barely knowing her character. And that's what I mean by The Last of Us doesn't have a shred of fat on it. It doesn't waste its time explaining all these other relationships, because the only important relationship in that game is Joel and Ellie. The entire game focuses on building up that relationship so that by the end, you really feel their connection, and you really feel that Joel is starting to love again. He's starting to open himself up, even though he's still like a really rigid and broken man on the inside. When you have something that perfect, it's really hard to recreate. So I'm really wondering what they're even gonna do. There are plenty of PS1, PS2, and even PS3 games that can be remade, but The Last of Us, really? Like, I can kind of see if the developers want to go back and fix up something that they hated, or maybe give the player more option or more freedom when it comes to missions, because the game is extremely linear. But I really don't see the need for a remake of The Last of Us, because as it is, it's great on its own, and it stands as its own thing. Like, in my Last of Us Part 2 review, I stated that the game did not need a sequel. That's how much I'm for in the camp of The Last of Us Part 1 is lightning in a bottle perfection, as close as you can get for storytelling in a video game. I was very much against the idea of even there being a sequel, and my entire basis for reviewing The Last of Us Part 2 was if the game even justified its own existence. And that's exactly how I would feel with the remake. I would judge that game on if it even needs to exist, because honestly, they could just port The Last of Us over to future Sony consoles with updated graphics, and that would be enough, because the story alone carries that game. you play that game for the story and less for the shooting. I mean, the shooting is fine, but it's like an interactive movie in a sense, and thus can't really be recreated or remade. The excellent experience is already there, and if you try to recreate it with different people, or if even one writer who worked on the first Last of Us is not there, it just won't be the same. I mean, we've seen time and time again that these remakes that come out from these studios who just want to recreate the big hit, the lightning in the bottle film or video game, they just don't work because they don't have the same people. I mean, it's called lightning in a bottle for a reason. Like, it rarely happens. It's super impossible, but when it does, it's spectacular and it's amazing and it's captured in its own little experience. And The Last of Us is a pretty special game to me. It's one of my favorites of all time, and I just really don't understand why this even needs to happen. I feel like it's once again kind of Sony shooting down really creative and new and innovative ideas in favor of what works and nostalgia, and hoping to cash in on people who haven't played the game before and to pique the curiosity of fans who love the first game and want to see any differences in the story. But as someone like me who's a kind of purist in the sense, I don't really understand the reasoning as to why this needs to exist. And I probably won't even play the game when it comes out, because to me, any and all subsidiary material for The Last of Us, excluding the DLC that came out for the game, I thought that was fantastic as well. But any kind of additional material to The Last of Us, whether it's a sequel or a remake, is just kind of a pass for me at this point. Because I feel like the initial experience was so solid for me that I don't need anything else. This story to me is captured in its one little way, and a remake with the same characters and everything just wouldn't be the same. And I really do feel like Sony is kind of doing a big misdirection, because there are plenty of other games that could be remade, but The Last of Us is like honestly the absolute last thing I would pick or expect to be remade for the current generation, because that just makes zero sense to me.